Okay, it's Thursday, the second to last day of our John Bible reading plan, and all I want to share with you today is something that I love in this last chapter of John, something about the structure that really stands out to me that I think is pretty encouraging. A couple of weeks ago, we read about the purpose of John's gospel. That was chapter 20, verses 30 through 31. These signs in particular were written, John talking about his whole reason for writing the gospel, but I loved what it says in verse 30. Jesus performed many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not recorded in this book. And then here at the end of John's gospel, what we read about this week is the idea in verse 25. Jesus did many other things as well. If every one of them were written down, I suppose that even the whole world would not have room for the books that would have been written. I don't know about you, but I read these words and I kind of get a little jealous. Like, I wish these books were written. I want to read them. I want to know about the other things that Jesus did that we don't know about. I mean, think about that. Jesus was on this earth for, it's estimated, at least 30 years. All the things he did growing up, all of the stories about what he was like as a child, all of the things he did during the 3 years that he was in ministry around Galilee and Jerusalem, we only have a tiny sliver of what that looks like. And I want the rest. But what I see in the way that John has crafted this story is these two verses that really talk about the same kind of theme. We couldn't possibly give you all of Jesus' life. We've chosen what we have for a reason. If we would have done everything, we wouldn't have even had room for it. John frames his story here at the end. It's like an epilogue with those two little passages. It's almost like a chiasm. And a chiasm is just a way of writing in the Jewish mindset where you have something at the end that's the same as something at the beginning, and it frames each other all the way through the middle. And usually what we think of in English writing or the literature that we're used to, like the end is the most important part. That's where the message is. We want to see what's at the end. But in Jewish writing, because they use chiasms so often, the crux of the writing is found in the middle. That's where the most meaning is drawn from, is that structure with highlighting the center of the story. And what do we see at the center of these two passages? It's the story about Peter being reinstated as a disciple, reestablished in his relationship with Jesus. What I see this story pointing to, this whole last section, is the idea that the world can't hold all the stories about Jesus because they're still being written. Because like Peter, all of us are guilty of betraying Jesus or not following God the way that we should. We call that sin, just going in a different direction than we should. And what this story is about is how Jesus can actually transform us and reconcile us and bring resurrection to our lives in the same way that he did with Peter's, even though Peter made a mistake. This is kind of how I see this book ending. It's a note of the story is still being written. How's it going to be written for you? The reason the world can't contain all the books that would be written is because what started in Galilee with a baby that was born in a manger in Bethlehem, it's grown to be something so much larger than just Jesus' story. It's Jesus' story lived on first through the disciples like Peter and through the other people who followed Jesus back when he was alive. And now it's spread all the way to you and to me as well. Jesus is still writing his story through us, through the way that we are being transformed and reconciled with Jesus, and the way that our lives are then shaped by being people who go and bring restoration and resurrection to other people, just as Peter did. Peter was the rock on which the rest of the church was built. That's what we're called to do. And in that way, of course, the story of Jesus can't be written and finished, finalized, because we are still taking part in it today. And I hope you see that as just a beautiful invitation for the way that you live your life. We're all like Peter in some ways or another. I really identify with Peter a lot, so maybe that's why I see this differently. But yeah, I think if we are honest, all of us are a little like Peter. And what this epilogue in John's gospel does is invite us to see our lives as an extension of the story that Jesus started so many thousands of years ago. And what that looks like for you is different than what it looks like for me, but the invitation is still the same. We get to partner with God in this grand narrative that he's writing that really has no end. And that, to me, is so cool to think about being a part, just a small sliver, a part of this larger story. I hope that that's encouraging for you to see yourself in Peter's shoes and just to see how you carry forward the story of God, just as Peter did.